locker room, and the allegations that even he was racist. Do you care to comment on that?
He didn't say that he was a racist, and Nick Foles was not a black person. He was a white person, but he got the same sense of it when he was there, and so that's why the locker room was in such disarray, because whatever his, first of all, he's a single guy. He's never been married. He's been a bachelor his whole life. He lives in a very isolated world where nobody tells him, I don't like what you do, or I don't like what you say, or I don't like the way you act. And that's part of the problem, is he lived in a little glass house, and he thought he was as superior to Belichick, which is laughable.
Yeah.
So, and when I looked at Chip Kelly when they hired him, I said, that's a terrible hire. The reason I thought it was because what most of the players at the Eagles were not young players. They were over 30. They were 31, 32. You can't keep them on the field with the no huddle for 4 quarters and expect them to have enough energy in the tank. And that's why this second half is always a problem with them, because they've already exhausted it the first half. So they cock the gun, they shoot it, and then they got nothing to show at the end. And that was so obvious to me that I said, and all my Philly guys would call me and say, what do you think? We're going to go to the Super Bowl. I just laughed and said, he sucks. He's never going to make it. And if you go in the locker room and you check it out, you'll see there's nothing but dissension. They were very quiet about it this year because he became the GM, and they knew he had more power. But they also still didn't like him. And I used to study coaches on the sideline when I was a GM, and I still do it just unconsciously. I look at their faces. I look at their expression. I look at how they interact with the players. And if none of that looks like it's actually cohesive, where you're patting them on the back, you're having conversation with him, you're putting your arm around his shoulder, that didn't happen with Chip Kelly. He had absolutely no physical contact with him, no oral contact with him, and he had this very poor expression on his face. I never saw him smile. Never.
Oh, that seems like that would be especially hard after coming from Andy Reid, who seems like he is the exact opposite of that.
Andy is, he'll put his arms around you. He'll listen to you for hours of your problems. He'll try to help you. But that went the other way. There's 2 ways that coaches can go that either help them or hurt them. In Chip Kelly's way, it hurt him because he had no personality and he wasn't able to communicate. In Andy's place, he became very soft after all of those years. So he'd let them get away with stuff, and he didn't want to get rid of anyone when he really needed to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and that was the problem on his side.
Yeah, sometimes if you get a little too close to your players, it could be very difficult to not build those extra relations that are essential when you're deciding whether or not you keep or cut somebody. And you can hold on to a player sometimes too long, I would imagine.
Well, and what I've seen in the 80s, my dad, Leonard Toews, was completely the opposite. He said, if this team has taken us to the Super Bowl, even though we didn't win, I don't want any of them fired. So don't come into me and tell me you want to get rid of them. And I would come in and I would say, but he's 35 years old. He's a running back. Where's he going? And he said, I don't care. I'm not getting rid of any of my players. So needless to say, the last few years were pretty poor because we had lots of injuries. And it's not their fault. It's just they just wear down. And today, what I noticed is with most of these teams and most of the owners, they don't give a damn about anybody. They don't care about a human being who put out their everything for them. And our team did that. They did that for Dick Vermeil. They gave him everything they had. They had every gas left in the tank. And so it was really hard to get rid of them.
I can imagine.
But
I really can.
If my job was to make sure that we had the best team, then I had at least to say this is what I believe we should do. No one ever said, yeah, go do it.
It's great that we actually have somebody who was doing at least half the job that Chip Kelly was with the player personnel right here on the air with us for the exact same team, and it's a complete honor for us to have you. Can you give us some insight just for a second into what you believe at this point this team needs heading towards the right direction? Who would you be thinking about as far as a coach? Now, of course, some of them are going to be completely off limits, the ones who are like having great success with their current teams. But if in an ideal world, how would you start to reassemble this team moving in the right direction?
Well, if I was Jeff Lurie, I would not pick another college coach as the starting coach. That I would say not to do. And the fact that he handed the keys to the kingdom to both Andy Reid and Chip Kelly, and they both blew in his face, one would think after one bad mistake you wouldn't make another one. And unfortunately, the most thing that really annoyed my dad was that most of the guys who started in the league that had the NFL, they were sports guys. They were involved in every sport. They were in college sports. They would be involved in it. They would understand the game. They would understand what the issues were, and they were deeply involved in it. But today, you've got rich millionaires and billionaires, and that's all they don't have that passion for sports or football. I mean, Hallis was a friend of my dad's. They all were, all the old timers, and they really knew the game. They loved the game, and they wanted it. They wanted it to be really interesting and really proper, and it wasn't. Because today you've really got, you've got lots of rookies in there, and they're not sports people, and they don't know football. And if you don't know football, you should know you don't hire your head coach to also be the GM because there's such a conflict of interest.
I can't think of any place
that's ever worked. Mom, you said that Dick Vermeil, that Grandpa was going to give him that job. He didn't even want it. Isn't that what you told me?
That's true. He said, "I'm not doing it. I'm not good at it. I'm not good at it." But he did bring Carl Peterson with him from UCLA, and Carl was a great player personnel guy.
Yeah.
And he would bring, he would travel all over the college or all over the country, and he would pick really good players that weren't expensive because they weren't known. And that's the whole secret to really being successful in the NFL. Find these little jewels. They don't have to be first round. They could be fifth round. They could be supplemental round. Find them and do the scouting and ask the other coaches questions. And I can't picture Chip Kelly picking up the phone in college and saying to a team other than Oregon, "What do you think of this guy?" Because I guarantee you his personality was the same at Oregon as it is at the Eagles. So nobody wanted to help him. They thought he was just a nasty guy, nasty, cold guy.
Wow.
And so that and part of the way that coaches get successful is they make friends with college coaches that they competed against, because then you get great information. You want to go find somebody, you want to be the GM, you want to find a player that's at that school. He couldn't go there because they didn't like him and they didn't trust him. So part of being a great coach is having great relationships in the college universe, because if you don't have great relationships in the college universe, how do you know what these kids are all about? Will you get the truth? If they don't like you, they're not going to tell you the truth.
Yeah,
and so that's why a good coach that comes out of college has to have good relationships, has to.
And these NFL teams will pay as much as $250,000 on some of the background checks for these particular players and for these coaches. It is amazing that they didn't have that type of intel regarding Chip Kelly when making the initial hire. However, he did bring him to 2 10-6 seasons, and until this season, everybody was just kind of up in the air as to whether or not this was going to work or not work. It's at this point, I believe it's proven itself not a tangible concept for the NFL, at least the Chip Kelly system. Do you believe that we have Chip Kelly going to another NFL team and getting another chance? Or do you think he's going back on to college?
I think he's going to go back to college where he belongs, because he doesn't like professional athletes.
Mm-hmm.
He can't handle them because, number one, they can threaten him. Number two, they have a different ego. They're already making a huge amount of money, and maybe they came from somewhere else as a free agent, and You know, when you've got players on your team and they don't even want to play for you, that says something right to the coach. And if any other stupid owner hires him, they'll be just as dumb as Jeff Lurie was.
Wow. You heard it here on Jock Journal Radio. So let me ask you one more last question, and we'll let you go here in just a second. And it's been an absolute terrific time, speaking with you. We have both the mother and the daughter here making an opportunity here for Jock Journal Radio. I'm curious, what is it like at growing up as well, because there's been now two generations of women who have grown up inside of an NFL franchise essentially. How does that happen? How does that feel? What does that deliver to you, and how does that make an impact in your life?
Well, I was there 5 years, and I knew football because my dad had girls, so that he got stuck with us. And
blessed with you.
And he was a Notre Dame, alumni, a very, very participating. When we were 2 and I was 2 and she was 3, and he said to my mother, "Damn it, I can't even take these kids anywhere. I can't take them to a football game." And she said, "Well, go ahead and take them." So we used to go on the train and go to South Bend, Indiana, and stay with Frank Leahy and his 8 kids, and we'd be there every week that we could get there. And it was pretty unbelievable because they were a football family, and we were immersed in it. So that's how we came to love football as a game and as a sport, because most of the time, the people around football are really good people, really good. And they have a tremendous, and I noticed that the coaches, when I first got there, and they kind of looked at me like, "Oh, what are we getting now?" But they were very, very polite, and they gave me the benefit of the doubt because I had to sign the players, and I knew I couldn't say I couldn't sign them because then I'd be thrown out the window. And a lot of times we overpay just because we had to, because there was a lot of pressure from the organization. And that's okay. If somebody says to me, "I really need him," even though he's older, even though we may get hurt, we really need him. And that was Vermeil. He would go to the bat for all these players. And I'd say, "Okay, but he's got to take a pay cut, but we'll keep them." And so there was lots of that kind of thing that happens. But when you become the GM and the head coach, and you get everybody out of your office, it's kind of like a president who isolates himself and doesn't get the real story. And that's exactly what was happening with Chip. They weren't telling him the truth because they knew he'd probably be crazy.
And when I was, young, young, and then through my teens, when my mother was running the team for my grandfather, and it was a family business. What it isn't right now, what most of these teams are, they're not family businesses. They're run by, businessmen, some smart, some not smart, with, gigantic vanity and an ego-driven business. But it's not a family business. Back when my grandfather, who I believe was, an incredible owner who really did care about the coaches and the players and the families, Joe Pisarcik and Ron Jaworski, those guys, they send me pictures of my grandfather at their kids' birthday parties. I don't think that other owners are doing that. And it wasn't like in a way of, I need to go and, make my guys happy. It was like, I really care about these people. And I care about the fans, and I want to do this for the fans of Philadelphia. A couple of years ago, I went to an Eagles game, and it was freezing cold, and my friends were, all saying to me, if your grandfather was still on the team, the one thing Leonard would have done, that stadium would have been on fire. It would have, everybody, he would have spent $1 million to get everybody free hot chocolates and free food and blankets and everything else, because he wouldn't want the fans to be uncomfortable. And that's why, winning to him was important, and being a winner, which in our family, we talk about winning versus being a winner. He wanted it to be a winner. Winning was temporary, and being a winner meant, you actually knew what it took to become a winner. And, I certainly think, I'm certainly, a little bit, biased in this, but that my mom as a female was an amazing GM and really could understand the empathy part of what it takes to be a winner. And that's what is missing from these NFL players these days, and from the coaches and from the owners. They don't understand the empathy side that my mom really has, and my grandfather too.
One of the things that's unique for me is I used to travel on the buses with the players, even though I was signing them, just because that was part of my job. It's not that way today. You don't have GMs sitting on the bus when either they lose or win after a game, and traveling with them and listening to them and having them come up and tell you stuff that maybe bothered them so that they could listen. Doesn't happen today. It just doesn't. And I think it's really important that you're accessible.